Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 109 of the Citrix session. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I've got Bill Sutton, Director of Services. Bill, you still got 7,000 hours of project ready work coming at you?
Pretty much. It's what it seems like these days, which is a good problem to have, I guess.
Good problem to have. Still a problem, though. So if you're listening and you would like to be on a digital workspace, end user compute, hardcore, focused on that industry and beyond team, then reach out and let XenTegra know.
Yeah, exactly.
You get to work with Bill, who is an awesome and knowledgeable manager, which is, not what everybody else has. We have someone who's good at managing and also knows how the stuff works, which, believe it or not, that's how it's supposed to work. Okay, Bill, I'm going to do this to both of you guys. I am using an LG all-in-one thin client and using a Zoom custom partition in iGel to do this one. I really want to do it through my virtual desktop, but I was having a crash, not a Citrix issue, not a Windows issue, but a browser issue earlier. Got that dreaded, do you want to wait for the whatever thing to run before it would move on? What are you using to record the podcast? And it's okay if you're using a fat PC, laptop, whatever. What are you using?
I'm using a fat laptop currently. I have done it using Teams or Zoom through VDI, but I wasn't using that today.
In XenTegra world, and I'm an idiot for not knowing this, Zoom offload, if you have the right pieces in the VDI and on your endpoint and the endpoint's Windows, does that currently work? Do we have that turned on and working?
I believe so, yes. Last time I did it, it worked fine.
Yeah, I got to go test that again and see if it's working or turned on. We're like the cobbler, right? We have shoes for our kids, but they're not the best shoes because we're too busy doing it everywhere else.
Yeah, exactly.
So Geremy Meyers is with us. Geremy is the Director of Sales Engineering for the Southeast for Citrix. How's it going?
First of all, thanks for the promotion. But second of all, that is true. I cover the Southeast. I'm not a director yet, but one of these days, maybe.
I just promoted you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. If you could nudge my W2, that'd be awesome too.
I don't even know who you report to anymore.
I roll Eric Bishop, actually. Long time guy. Yeah, you know Eric.
Oh yeah, I just so many people I got thinking. All right, so what's your device endpoint story?
So right now I am fat for this Zoom call here. I do have two virtual desktops open right now. So I have my Citrix desktop, which I use quite a bit. I use it for team calls. I use it for a lot of, and this kind of plays into our conversation today. I use it a lot for internal web apps for sure. So a lot of our, engineering dashboards, a lot of our, some of the Tableau dashboards, they only exist internal, right? So
the only way you can get to them is to tunnel through, and I'm using the word tunnel specifically, but it's not really tunnel, but it is really tunnel, through an application, also Windows, being an application. That's the only way you have access to those things.
Correct. On the way in. And then I have a second environment that is my team's lab environment. And so we're going through configuring some things for AVD, adaptive auth, some other things like that. But, that's completely separate and irrelevant outside of me just wanting to name drop that we're, doing some of that stuff as well and tinkering with the new features that we have with, which looks like our topic today, secure private access. So.
Well, to me, it's not irrelevant, right? Because it's, first of all, you got to use your own stuff. And I can't tell you how many companies we work with where I try to impress them with the idea that we're using our own stuff. And it just goes right by them. I'm like, no, you have to understand this because when time comes, you need to use your own stuff. And if you're running around on a $2,000 laptop expecting your users to use a virtual desktop and you're not using it, shame on you. And at the same time, your team has to have a lab. I don't know how many clients we have that have a single machine catalog, maybe, and that's their lab. And you're like, that just won't get it done. There's too many intricacies these days.
Well, I'll tell you what, right? So when I first started at Citrix, by the way, this is 10 years at Citrix. So I don't want to make you feel old, Andy, but it occurred to me as I was sitting at the 10-year anniversary of XenTegra that this might be my 10 years at Citrix. And of course it was, and I got the email. So that was fun. But I remember back when I first started and I wanted a lab, and here's what that looked like. I went and bought like 3, I want to say small form factor shuttle PCs, something I could slap in, some CPU, a whole lot of RAM, and some solid state drives, right? Because I wanted to run Zen server. I wanted to have a pool. And I wanted to, tee all this stuff up. The biggest challenge I had at the time was trying to figure out the Microsoft licensing. right? Because I didn't have RDS cows. So that meant I had to rebuild XenApp servers literally every, 180 days? Anyways, long story short, I remember how hard it was for me to give up that on-prem lab environment because I've got space in Azure now, right? And so we'll build some things in Azure, stand it up, tear it down, multiple different catalog types and those sorts of things, just because, man, folks are just, they're asking, first of all, I just want to know how things work. We all want to know how things work, but some of the scenarios customers kind of put in front of us, it's nice that we have a more flexibility now because it's in a hyperscaler like Azure that we can go tinker with. So it was really cool.
Yeah, I love that comment. But as a person who's been dealing with a customer over the weekend and today, that's like, okay, tell me exactly what to do, but then scope out all the options. I'm like, all the options. You know what you just said? I mean, it's like, and then so at the end of the day, and they were very open to it. At the end of the day, we just told them, hey, this is our blueprint. This is where we want to go with you.
Mm-hmm.
Like this, great. If you want to deviate some, great. If you want to completely overhaul it. But for us to, be able to guarantee you a price and guarantee you a solution that works, we really need to follow this blueprint. And they were all, and then we started talking about, 2 nines versus 4 nines. And all of a sudden they're like, no, it doesn't matter. 2 nines is great. I mean, it's not great, but it's really, really good. And the truth is we're not going to know the difference between 2 and 3 nines.
Probably not. What's that? 12 hours, 16 hours, something like that. The difference between 2 nines and 5 nines, I forget, but it's something like that.
Yeah.
And that's over the course of a year. So let me put that in perspective. But yeah, I'm with you.
Well, and guys, we have picked for today the following topic. And as I was looking this one on the left from 5 days ago, introduction to Citrix adaptive authentication. I want to come back and do that one, guys. So put that on the list for next week.
Ooh, we might have that configured for next week too. So that might be fun for sure.
Yeah. You're gonna be hot off the top, hot off the presses in your lab. Okay, so but for this week, another one by Stephen Bills. I think it's pronounced that way. Former Citrix sales engineer, but now a product manager, I believe. This one, Citrix features explained. So we're staying in that series, and it's increased app security with Citrix Secure Private Access. We want to go through that one today. So, Geremy, can you kind of just tee us up by telling us, what this is and why it matters?
So, in a nutshell, it's protecting access to public, and this is right off the bat. This is really what it does, right? So we're protecting access to public SaaS apps, right? What does that mean? A public website, right? So if you're a user of, say, Salesforce, right? How as an organization do you protect that outside of things like single sign-on, right? Private web access. So what if that SaaS app, that website, that app that you're delivering exist internally? And then lastly, client server application access, right? So, something that involves a client, like a fat client, and then some sort of backend, right? Honestly, something that might represent a traditional Citrix app. You might have a scenario where, you want to protect that outside of a traditional XenApps and desktop deployment, which maybe that's a good conversation in itself, because that still might not make sense. But really, that's what we're talking about with, SPA, secure private access, is, protecting public, private, and even client server apps if you need to.
Well, let's dig on the first one a little bit. So, and I'm being very specific here because I can't tell how many people in the Citrix world don't know what you guys do for SaaS apps. Yeah. And that's probably one of the most future-proofing pieces of your business. And I kind of blame that on the success on the x86 side of the house. Some people are just stuck in that world and don't realize that they've got to have some of those same features and beyond for the SaaS, the browser application, in this case, public facing. So, so this topic simply is how to strengthen SaaS, software as a service, app security with public software as a service, app access. And you'll see me do that occasionally. I quit with the acronyms because, to be frank, a lot of people get caught up in the acronyms, and when you ask them what they mean, they don't actually know.
Right.
And that's
the same. Well, the same thing goes for a SaaS app, right? I just think we assume folks know what a SaaS app is, but at the end of the day, what are we talking about? A public website, for instance, right? So if your organization runs off of, Microsoft Dynamics, if it runs off of Salesforce, if it runs off things, these are all SaaS apps, right? And organization is delivering up a website to their users for their application access. That's what we're talking about here.
And the chances that you would take today a Dynamics and you bring it in-house and deliver it through a browser, but do it privately. almost unheard of. It used to be pretty common, but now it's almost unheard of.
Well, and there's still some apps out there like that, right? So for instance, take Oracle, their ERP is probably installed, it could be the cloud version, but we get a lot of folks running that internally. SAP. I mean, that's a big mammoth app, right? And so folks are, struggling to get that, into the SAP cloud. So
apps.
Yeah. I mean, listen, we still have customers running Windows XP. So if you think that, folks are going to go to the cloud with some of these things, it's going to take a lot of effort because there's a lot of technical debt there, honestly.
Right.
So let me do this first, and then we'll let you and Bill both comment on this. So SaaS, it all starts with single identity, if possible, that allows you to multi-factor authenticate, that then enables you for single sign-on into everywhere you want to go after that. And if you want to, you can even turn off single sign-on and force them to re-authenticate. But there's a balance between, okay, I want to make it easy, single identity. I want to make it secure, multi-factor. I want to make it easy and secure, single sign-on. And I could even turn that up a level if need be. Is that basically what Citrix is providing, or is there something beyond that we're talking about here with the public SaaS offerings?
So Citrix can provide all those things you just described, but they can also take that a step further, right? So I think to sort of be in the space right now, you have to provide or be able to provide that single sign-on. You have to be able to provide that second factor as a way of protecting the front door of that app. I would argue, forcing users to re-authenticate might be less secure than doing the single sign-on, in the sense that, now here's another password a user's got to remember. If you're like my dad, you're probably going to use the same password several different locations. So there's a security challenge in itself. But on top of that, it's just multiple attack surfaces you've opened up. So when you do single sign-on, if you can just pull back the user's ability to manage their own password and just put that behind a single identity with multi-factor, I think you've gone a long way. But yes, at the very least, that is step one. But there are some additional things we can do, and we can get into that.
So my comment on the re-authenticate piece was after like a timeout type thing. And I guess at that point, you're re-authenticating back to the single identity to come right back through again. Bill, any thoughts, comments on how this is playing out? And do you see our customers implementing this across the board, or is it still just one-offs that get?
It's mostly one-offs at this point. I think, to be honest with you, that my view is that a lot of customers don't really know that Citrix offers this at this level, and at the level that Geremy's about to go into, the items that go beyond just SSO. Because to Geremy's point, having the ability to use single identity, single sign-on, multi-factor, those are the entry points. You've got to have that. Those are the got to haves. And then what Citrix provides in addition to that is where I think the real added value is. And there's lots of security elements that go along with that we'll get into. But I don't think that your average customer, I think many of them still see Citrix as the VDI play. And that's obviously still a very solid play, but there's a lot more that this technology in particular can do than what they've been doing.
Well, and I want to call out that customers thinking to use Citrix for SaaS apps and protection of SaaS apps. I mean, part of what we talked about before is just want to highlight that Citrix actually has that single identity, single sign-on, multi-factor challenge piece all within the product. And a lot of people are looking to third parties, which is fine. So you're going to be able to work with those too. But I mean, it's in the product you're already buying and paying for. You don't have to look elsewhere for just the basic things we've talked about so far.
Right.
That's true. And so I think a lot of our conversations with customers who are longtime customers is just exposing them to what they already own, right? So they don't realize that, in a lot of cases, this is functionality they've already got. If you've got an ADC, I mean, even if you're not using the cloud service, this is something that we've done in some capacity for a long time. And again, just serving up web apps, I mean, that is the number one published application in Citrix today. The SaaS, the non-SPA stuff we're talking about here, a web browser, publishing an internal web app, or even potentially a public web app. I mean, folks are doing that today for some of the security reasons that, we haven't gotten into yet, but just being able to protect that data is pretty important to customers.
Yeah. So Geremy, what beyond single identity, single sign-on, multi-factor, when it comes to public SaaS, what else can you do with Citrix to take that security story to another level?
So let me ask you this question. What security reasons were customers deploying Citrix, I'll say Citrix, virtualized Windows applications or even Linux applications? Like, why did they do this in the past?
Well, to be honest, most of the time it was that case we're going to talk about in a minute where it's private apps and that's the only way you could get there.
Mm-hmm.
The other was performance reasons. It is historically in my world been very rare that they did it for security reasons, even though they got the security benefits of it by doing it the way they felt like they needed to, they got security benefits they may or may not even recognize.
Well, so I think in some customers, I've seen sort of a delineation when they're rationalizing their apps and they're looking what's out there. They'll go, hey, there are certain apps in our portfolio that need some additional levels of security. I get that. And then sometimes it doesn't matter, right? I just need to get this app in front of this user. I'm not so concerned around, managing printing or copy and paste. Some of this will fall into whatever industry and regulation that you need to protect for. But when you look at that application portfolio, they realize there's a few that do and here's a few that don't. But the fact that we can enable some of those controls on those applications has been a big selling point for a long time. And so what we're noticing is two things. One, what if we could provide that same level of control to web and SaaS apps, even apps that aren't hosted within your data center, that are those SaaS apps that are public facing? And then secondly, still provide that same rationalization. Listen, there are some apps that I just don't care about, right? Getting you into, Salesforce, for instance, I might want to lock that down potentially. I'm not saying I need to, but I can provide copy and paste, and I can provide, printing restrictions and things like that. I can also turn on things like, anti-key logging, right? So if I want to protect the user as they're logging into this app from a local browser, maybe I can do that as well, right? So, I think just being able to rationalize and turn on some of those additional controls that we've had for Windows apps that we've published to SaaS apps is pretty powerful.
Yeah, understanding the need of those things like a watermark, like a key logging, like turning off printing, turning off copy paste, turning off download. Yeah, this is my one I use all the time. If I use it on the podcast before, please forgive me. But WikiLeaks, had he only had access through ICA, that wouldn't have happened. He'd have had to take in screenshots of 10,000 documents instead of just a download. And had it been in the world of Citrix today, even the download piece, we would have seen that happening and could have taken action.
So we could have restricted the ability to do screenshots unless he wanted to take pictures of his monitor, right?
Yeah.
That's true. But, to take it a step further, and this goes into probably more of the SBA stuff, but, being able to go beyond single sign-on and MFA to, what we call adaptive auth, but really it's kind of like a contextual access, right? So being able to posture the device before you give them access to that SaaS app. So what kind of device, whatever, where are you coming from, and just tying that into even our own security analytics story. So being able to say, hey, based on your risk score to the organization, maybe even, turn that application off and on, or at least enable additional security controls based on your risk score. These are all things that you can do, and you can do that with something that's not even hosted in your data center, which is pretty powerful.
Absolutely.
I want to come back.
Is kind of like the old EPA concept, but to the next level.
It is absolutely the EPA concept, but to the next level. Yep.
And the next level, and from a different, the conceptual stuff's the same, but it's coming from somewhere else, and it's coming through this browser thing that, isn't the same as this. Look, in a lot of times using Citrix to provide access to an application, some of the security intangibles was just the fact that all you got was the application and you had to find a way to break out of it if you could.
Right. Well, and just to tag team on that. So, even once you're in that web or SaaS app, being able to do things like isolate links out of that access. So for instance, if I go into like a Salesforce and, there's a link buried in that Salesforce page and I click it, being able to say, hey, listen, what's the status? What's the posture of this link? Is this something I trust? Is there something I don't trust? Maybe it just opens up in a different browser tab, or I can turn on a feature called browser isolation, which will launch that link in a containerized browser so that, listen, it's not going to impact either what's in Salesforce, or, if this is an internal web app, that's not going to impact something in my data center. So I can isolate traffic depending on the posture of things like embedded links, which is pretty slick.
Hey, what's the likelihood these days that a Rike or a Salesforce or a Workday or a Concur has the ability to turn off public access that doesn't come through this digital workspace and takes advantage of the Citrix or somebody else's offering?
So it's, I mean, you tell me if I'm wrong, Bill, but for a lot of these apps, it's pretty common that you could whitelist and blacklist access from certain locations. Like I know, maybe this is with Office 365. I mean, you can whitelist and blacklist where traffic can come from. So for instance, you could say, hey, I'm not going to allow users to hit my website directly from their local browser from wherever they're at. But, if they're coming in through the data center or they're coming in through a certain, location, we will allow access. So I don't know if this is what you're asking, Andy, but being able to partition off where folks can access from means the only way to access some of these applications is from this digital workspace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I'm asking. I'm
okay.
Forcing us to have to use this digital workspace. In some cases, is the only way we're ever going to get control over it happening.
Well, I
By the
think
way,
that goes back to the single identity SSO concept, that you cannot get into Salesforce unless you authenticate via Azure AD or some other identity provider. And if you can't go to salesforce.com and enter your credentials, you don't know what they are. I think that's one way. But with adaptive auth is the ability to say, if you're coming from this IP range, you're allowed. If you're not coming from that IP range, you're not allowed. If your device is of a certain type or what have you, then you can get to the application. If you don't have that, then you can't get to the application, and so on.
Well, the other thing too, and maybe this is where Andy was going, is the traffic to that SaaS app might not be able to be sourced from your local machine directly. So, for instance, one of my favorite demos is I'll publish IP chicken, into Workspace, and I've got a secured and unsecured version. And if I run the unsecured version, it shows the IP address of my local machine, right? But if I run the secured version, what I'm doing is I'm forcing it to go through my data center and proxy through that data center to hit IP chicken. So it'll show the IP address of the data center. So in other words, I can restrict the ability of a user to access directly from the endpoint. You're forced to go through the data center, all the security controls, anything you might have running there as well, before you access that traffic. Now, does that introduce some latency? Probably a little bit, depends on the app. But, again, there's another security control you can enable, in that scenario.
So we really, in our world, have two options. One, we can make it so great in the digital workspace world with single identity, multi-factor challenge, but single sign-on after that they want to use it, which is what we try to do as XenTegra. But I notice at the end of the day, I've still got very smart people in my company that are going out and logging into everything, creating links on their browser, on their computer, and then creating the same links on their home computer. And then we've got multi-factor turned on everywhere, but they're building their own system around it. And I'm like, why don't you just use what we sell? And the only way I'm ever going to get us all there is to turn off the ability to go around us.
Yeah. Yep. So a lot like to your point. So Reich, Salesforce, some of these sites can do that today. Just whitelist, blacklist. Where can this traffic come from? Yep. And well, in some cases, it's not like Bill said. If you don't know your password, then you have to go to the workspace. You can't, you can't type it in directly because you just don't know.
Yeah. Hey, did we hit on in this topic the ability? You mentioned the sandbox browser. I don't know that we mentioned the browser as a service yet. I think it applies here. We use it for demo purposes for our Salesforce within our workspace as well as our Outlook. But the sandbox browser that's part of your workspace app, as well as the browser as a service, which is Chromium running on a Linux machine in Azure, reboots back to a gold image. That applies as one of the stories here too, right?
It does. And I guess I don't necessarily delineate when I talk about the isolated browser. So we do have a service that is hosted by Citrix. It is basically a XenApp delivered. I say XenApp. It is a virtual app running a browser that's taking that link and isolating it for you. But there is a browser built into the Workspace app. In fact, it's Chromium based. It's actually super fast. And honestly, the user experience based on the first version we had is pretty impressive. In fact, sometimes I forget that it's not Chrome, or at least not my local Chrome browser.
Dumb question for me. Is there a way to call that browser from the Workspace app other than being redirected by the Workspace itself?
Ask that one more time. Let me think through that as you're saying it.
Right click, if you can see my screen here, which I think you can. Like, is there a way to actually call the sandbox browser, or is it simply a matter of publishing something and it being told use the local sandbox browser to do this under these conditions?
Right now, you have to call a link that pulls up the browser. But I'll be honest, I wish we would add that functionality. I don't know if it's on the roadmap, but I would love to pull up just that sandbox browser because it's that good.
And on my computer here, I'm essentially doing that. I've got Chromium, part of my iGel solution that you can probably see on the screen here, but it's not the same as a truly isolated sandbox browser. This one is a part of the iGel sandbox, which is not, I don't think that part's totally read-only. That can have some residuals.
Are you showing it, Andy? I can't see it. Maybe I forgot to use a computer.
No, you're good now. How about now?
Oh, there we are. Yep, I got you.
That's my real world. I go to desktop. I got 4 desktops. I really should have 1 or 2, but I own the company, therefore I have 4. But I've got workspace right here. I would love to be able to just call a generic sandbox browser and know that inside that app, I've created this truly isolated, go away when I close it world, and I'm in control of it. The best I have right now in this iGel unit, at least, is to use the Chromium that's included as part of iGel.
Yeah, we don't have that just yet. The browser service does that. I don't think there's residuals on the Workspace app, but I also can't just call that Workspace app either. Not yet. I have to call a link first.
I click on Chrome browser secure, and it's going to probably use your Chrome service, I believe. And I'm going to have what I need. It just takes another click or 2, but that's okay.
Yeah, I think this is probably calling the service too.
Yeah,
like you said.
We'll be able to tell because we'll see the desktop viewer toolbar inside. We'll see an old school Citrix launch, but fast and very lightweight.
Yeah.
Yeah. See how it kind of drags around.
And even though this is an isolated browser, we still got the ability to proxy into your data center. So if you got an internally hosted web app, we can still present that inside of that isolated browser. So we've got we got an appliance that sits in your data center called the connector appliance, and it does all of that proxy for you, which is nice. Yeah.
I think what we're really talking about in this whole conversation is Citrix is a massive security company and security play. It's just, it's not the ecosystem. You guys want to go disrupt every other partner of yours in the ecosystem. So you don't talk about it as much as you could. And because it takes one extra level of thinking to get people there, a lot of people don't come to their own conclusions.
So I think we could do a better job of just understanding. When I say we, I mean, Citrix. We could do a better job of understanding the applications that our customers are deploying outside of what I'm going to use air quotes Citrix, right? So we'll focus in on. In fact, sometimes customers, just because they don't know, will just assume we're talking about what they're delivering with Citrix, and they'll tell us what that is, and we'll talk through their use cases and things like that, who are their user groups, their scenarios. But then we don't always go next level and go, well, what are you delivering outside of Citrix? And sometimes that's sometimes it's a question that our normal contacts don't know. But sometimes it's just they haven't thought of, well, heck yeah, I mean, I've got all these public websites that I'm sending folks to. I never really thought of that. Here's what we're using, right? So that's just an easy conversation to have.
Well, if I could put on my transparent hat with you real quick, I think one of your problems is a lot of partners like XenTegra, they're happy to sell the Citrix solution, but also want to sell all these other security plays that if you executed the Citrix play correctly, you wouldn't be able to sell the other stuff. So a lot of times the message never lands. Just my take.
On the flip side of the flip side, I might say that, I think security in general is a layered approach. And so, I mean, I think there's space to layer in what Citrix can do from this solution into maybe some of those. I know we're getting very specific here, but, what some of those other solutions are. Because again, there's not one solution that does security across the board. And, a lot of our conversations with customers is where does Citrix and what we're doing play into maybe their existing security strategy? Where do we meet some layers? And are we going to displace some products? Probably. But on the flip side, I think we're going to find that we need to integrate nicely with some of these other products as well. I mean, listen, I'll use Okta as a great example, right? So understanding what Okta does and understanding the value there, I think there's a great story. I mean, we can leverage and integrate Okta into the workspace. In fact, we do it at Citrix today. Yeah. But understanding what that solution does and where they layer together is pretty important.
Hey, Bill, would you like to see the antivirus I'm running on this iGel read-only unit?
Sure.
Okay, where do I find it?
This is a
good question.
I just don't need it, right? But if I sold you a Windows endpoint, guess what? I could sell you antivirus for the VDI and for the endpoint, and
that's right.
This is not the right one. Okay. Next one is increase private web app security without disrupting UX, so user experience. Again, acronyms everywhere. How does private web app compare to SaaS, Jeremy? I don't know why are we using different terms this time?
Let me get down into that here real quick.
Good point.
First sentence it actually calls it SaaS. Oh, yeah, never mind. I'm sorry.
I mean, it's just an internal SaaS app is what it is. So, obviously there are public websites and this is a private website. So how do you grant access to those apps? So what did we do in the past? We published a browser, we published Chrome, IE, whatever, right? Or a desktop. And that's how we granted access. So now, we could provide just a link on that same workspace that proxies you right into it without the virtualization piece. Not needing a desktop, not needing Windows in the background to host it.
Well, you kind of talked about this a while ago when you talked about actually publishing a secure browser service that has a backdoor into your environment. You've got external access to your internal.
And without having to instantiate a VPN client, a virtual private network client on your endpoint, right?
Correct. So I think, so the answer is yes. So for public websites, absolutely. For private websites, absolutely. When we get into VPNs, I think that maybe we'll save that one for the next one when we talk about client server apps. But you're correct. It's a clientless access. It's a reverse proxy into an internal website, and you're protecting it because there's nothing about that internal website that's exposed.
I had a conversation with a college computer science kid, super smart. And I tried to explain some of this the other day, sitting on the back porch over a beer. And he go, oh, like a VPN. And I'm like, get that thought out of your mind. If you ever use a VPN going forward, you're doing it wrong. Just remember I said
that. That's awesome. I'm just impressed that he knew what a VPN was. I think we're starting to trend away from that, generally speaking. At least I hope we are.
Well, he's doing his college internship. No, they just hired him full time because he's so awesome. He's still in college.
Yeah.
But they're so far behind. They're poisoning the water hole, is how I would say.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you think about how VPNs work, right? You've created a tunnel from that endpoint into the data center.
Are we talking about the VPN I had in 1997 or the one I could have right now?
So to be fair, VPNs haven't changed that much. They might have transitioned from like IPsec to SSL, but at the end of the day, it still does the same thing, which is open up a tunnel to the data center, which, by the way, is an explicit allow, right? And so IT's got to go in, the security team's got to go in and actually create access control list that say, hey, this is what you can't do once you've connected. And that's what we call leaky, which means that's hard to maintain. Like, how do you know what's new that you need to go block? So I think what we're doing with our ZTNA, our secure private access with what we're calling the zero trust network access, is it's an explicit deny. And then you got to go turn on what's allowed through, which is much, much different.
Yeah. Hey, can we talk about zero trust real quick? Because Jeremy, you and I, and Bill to some degree, but you and I live in a place where a lot of folks from the north have moved to the south, correct?
You were not wrong.
Is it fair to say that most people from the north have a zero trust posture that people from the south are just now starting to understand?
We're not even talking about technology, are we? Just general, just life viewpoints.
I've got a friend of mine now that has a condo, similar place I do, and her name is Linda, and I met her. And then 3 days later, I approached Linda again, and she was guard up immediately because she didn't remember meeting me. And I went up to give her a hug, and she was about to call the police on me because she had no idea.
So what you needed to do in a zero trust world is re-authenticate yourself with her so that she knows.
That's right.
Maybe MFA with some knowledge that we met before.
Well, no, I should have approached her and said, hey, nice meeting you Sunday night at the Homeowners Association meeting. I'm Andy. Good to see you again. Now can I have a hug?
Yeah, sometimes that needs to be until the algorithm realizes who you are based on the analytics.
Yeah,
man, you know what? We could really run with this idea if we let ourselves.
But that's what this is all about. It is coming from a world where there's bad stuff happening, and you have a guard that takes 2 or 3 authentications before you let it down a little bit.
I actually really like that. I'm going to steal that. That's good. That is true.
So what have we not covered here in the zero trust world of private web apps, aka private SaaS, that we still need to cover?
I would layer on, because this is internal. These web apps that we're talking about are internal. It still doesn't change the need to protect the web app itself, right? So even though I've provided access, listen, folks could still script it, right? You could still find a way in and maybe do some cross-site scripting, all the things that you would normally use a web app firewall for. So just build an awareness around the fact that, even though you've allowed access, this is still something internal to your network you need to protect. So the same reason you deployed ADCs in the past is the same reason you'll need to deploy an ADC, or, we've got ADC as a service now. Protect that application, with some sort of, web app firewall, or even more importantly these days, protect the API.
So I thought I was going to show you that I'm in what I put up on the screen here is my non-persistent GPU enabled VDI. And until right now, Buzzsprout, which is what I use to post the podcast, was blocked because it was considered, social media consumer or something. So yeah, there's app firewall related things, inbound and outbound in this case. All that stuff still matters. And I could show you in my tray running here, I have the Citrix workspace app. So I could use that to have rules that prevent where I can go to once I've gotten to here, which is my kind of jumping off point. I still need to have control where I go after that. And Citrix is enabling both the access and the security on both pieces of the equation at the same time.
Oh, and by the way, nice background wallpaper. I love that. I love the Red Bull.
It's missing the Citrix one though. I couldn't find exactly the one I wanted. And I know you've probably heard me say this 10 times. I've probably said on the podcast. I had the original Red Bull meeting at the NASCAR team. This was my and Ben Greaves' idea long before Citrix and the Formula One team did it.
Oh my, man. I'd love to hear that story at some point. That's interesting.
Yep. All right. Moving on, the next section, and I think it's our last section, really says simplify secure remote user access to private client server apps. Okay. We've talked about public SaaS. We've talked about internal private SaaS. What is this part talking about?
So this is, think of it almost like first of all, let me take a step back and say, for performance reasons, this might not be a great idea for a lot of client server applications. So, think about how folks are using VPNs today, right? So I establish a VPN tunnel. I fire up on my local machine, the client side of a client server app, and then I'm hitting, the server app in the data center, right? So sort of the anti-version of what we've deployed Citrix for years, the idea of putting the client right next to the server in the data center to make the performance better. There might be some scenarios where you need to put the client on the endpoint, or that's just how it works. And you want to provide access back in, right? So we talked about VPNs a little bit ago, where you fire up a VPN and it's almost like an explicit allow. So this is zero trust network access. So this is like a restricted VPN where once you've connected, it's an explicit, disallow. So you can't pass traffic, and you've got to go in and actually allow traffic. So for instance, if I wanted to allow, secure shell because I'm an IT admin, I can fire up PuTTY on my local machine through this service here, connect into maybe a server back in the data center. But the only thing I'm allowing through is, port 22 for secure shell. We point out maybe, Exchange here or potentially SQL. Same idea applies. But again, at the end of the day, you got to figure out what makes sense to do something like this, because you might impact performance, but it's like a more secure VPN is essentially what it is. And to take it a step further, we can layer on all of the zero trust access as well. So for instance, the multi-factor, the endpoint analysis, just adding additional security controls, that's all a part of this access as well. And more importantly, some of the security analytics that we can factor in as well. So where you're coming from, that might, the posture of your machine might let us know whether or not you can, access it all. But this is what we're talking about here. This is client server access with the client on your machine, the server back in the data center, and providing that access back in.
And is that client we're talking about really just the Citrix Workspace app?
Today it's not. It's actually a secure access client from Citrix that you would use to tie in, but I know the roadmap is to integrate that functionality in a Workspace app. It's just not there today.
And I would add one word to what you're saying, doing all this and tying all the other stuff together intelligently, right? We can do it based on endpoint analysis. We can do it on real-time whatever you're accessing. It's like you said, we're zero trusting, but we can even get smart about when and where we trust things.
Yep. And we can segment to specific apps too. So that's probably one of the key pieces here.
Hey, Bill, do we have a single customer that's implemented this?
Not all the way through, no. Actually, I can't think of one that's done even the basic secure private access.
But
yeah,
do we have a bunch of customers that need to do this?
Sure, yeah. They just don't know about it.
Just don't know about it. I don't know how to fix it. I mean,
that's an assumption on my part, but when they go to the grocery store and they only want milk, that's what they're going to go looking for. They don't know that there's all kinds of other things available to them unless they look or pay attention.
Yeah.
So here's what I'll say. We officially released secure private access the beginning of April, right? So it's fairly fresh from a SKU perspective. Now, granted, the things around single sign-on, multi-factor, publishing the web apps. I mean, this has been something that's been in Workspace for a couple of years now, so not new. But when we talk about adaptive auth, that's a brand new feature that was just released. Yeah. At the beginning of the quarter. The zero trust network access that we just talked about, that private access for client server web apps, that's still tech preview, so that hasn't released just yet. So I guess what I'm saying, Andy, is I'm giving you a pass. But moving forward, we have no excuse.
But I think any customer that's publishing a web browser to get to a SaaS app is ripe for this. And we have customers that do that today.
Probably most of them.
Yes. And
most
many,
of them,
and
all of them,
very many
all
of
of them.
Yeah, all of them. And very many of them will use a published app or even a published desktop, as you said earlier, Geremy, to get to an internal web app or an internal application of some sort. Now, if you're talking about, on-premises dynamics or something like that, you're not going to want to use this. I don't think you're going to want to use this secure remote user access to client server because the chattiness of that app, the whole reason we did Citrix to begin with, or part of the reason of delivering the access as close to the data as possible. We don't, if we go back a step and do that using the client server concept here from the, through secure private access, that it's not going to perform as well. But for those that are, completely web apps on-prem or completely SaaS apps, absolutely.
But Bill, couldn't you argue that when you and I made those decisions back in the day, we were talking 56K dial-up modems in some cases, and now we've got bandwidth and latency that is just it's faster than the LAN we had at the time.
Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true.
I think in a lot of cases, Citrix is a victim of its own success.
Yeah, I told the story to someone else. You said 56K modems. I remember our first farm was a dial-up modem bank in a server, DL380.
Oh yeah, HP net servers, DL380s, digiboards. Yeah,
the digiboard. That was the guy right there. Yeah.
I remember I had a bank of like 15 modems, and I'd go in there and hear all the squeaking and squawking. That's how I knew it was all working.
Yes, sir.
All right, guys, you got 4 minutes left. I'll give it back to you. Thank you for joining, and we'll get this posted. And I'm going to share it with a couple clients and my sales folks. It's like, you got to just have people watch this video, listen to the podcast, something. It's too valuable not to.
Yep. Bill, Andy, always a pleasure. Till next time.
Thanks, Geremy.
Thanks.